What I'd like to do today is talk about an aspect of ArmA that's been improved substantially in ArmA 3. The subject of this video is ballistics, and more specifically, it's terminal ballistics, the things that happen after a bullet has hit something. You may have seen the basic version of one of the scripts I'll be using here. A guy named Hypnomatic made it, and it's an easy way to illustrate the trajectories of bullets in ArmA. If you've seen videos of this or used it before, you've probably found it to be a pretty cool visualization of something that often goes unnoticed. The original version's great, but I wanted to see something a bit beyond what it was representing. I didn't just want to know if a bullet penetrated a given material, I also want to know how much energy it had on the other side, since this factors heavily in the damage. To that end, I've modified the script to introduce color coding. Let's go over those colors briefly. First, we have red. A trail will be red when the bullet is moving at more than 75% of the velocity it left the barrel at, which is known as the muzzle velocity. If it turns yellow, it's between 50 and 75%. Green is between 25 and 50. Blue is below 25%, while white means it is at less than 10%. In essence, you can think of blue as a lower threshold for significant damage, while white is basically non-lethal. For your average battle rifle round, 10% of the muzzle velocity is akin to the speed a paintball would be flying at. It might sting to hit you, it might break unprotected skin, but it shouldn't be a debilitating wound. So, terminal ballistics. What factors into this in ArmA? Well, there are a few things to consider. The bullet's size, the speed it's traveling at, what it hits, and what angle it impacts at. I don't want to get too technical or specific here. I'd rather present this as a general concept that you can apply more or less intuitively to different scenarios you find yourself in. To that end, I've selected a set of representative weapons that we'll use to demonstrate penetration in ArmA 3. First off, we have the Mark 20 bullpup rifle, which fires a 5.56mm NATO round. This is the lightest rifle you'll find in the default ArmA 3 weapon set, and it was a common NATO round used in ArmA 2. Next, we have the MX rifle. This fires a 6.5mm round. In essence, this is shooting a bullet that's designed to give the average infantry weapon a bit more punch than 5.56, without becoming as heavy as larger caliber bullets. This is a standard issue Blue 4 round for ArmA 3, and it's shared by the Op 4 side as well. After that, we have the Mark 18, which fires a 7.62mm NATO round, not to be confused with what the AK-47 would fire, which is a shorter round. 7.62 NATO is a heavy, powerful bullet. And it's the same as what the AH-9 Little Bird has for its miniguns. Then we have the Vermin submachine gun, firing the .45 caliber ACP pistol round. I'm only demonstrating this one submachine gun. Pistols and submachine guns perform essentially the same for the purposes of this, and they're not used nearly as much or have nearly as much variance as the rifles do. Last for our infantry weapons is the GM6 50 caliber or 12.7mm sniper rifle. This is the Warsaw Pact version of the 50 cal, meaning that the bullet's slightly longer than the NATO one. However, for our purposes, they're close enough. We can assume that anything we see from this rifle will hold more or less true for any 50 caliber machine guns in the game. There are also a few other things we'll look at, but these are the core weapons we'll be using. Alright, let's get started. For our first demonstration, I have a set of wooden walls. The idea here is to fire different rounds at the walls and see how far each one penetrates. This helps to establish baseline expectations for the different calibers present. As a point of note, throughout this video I'll be altering the time a fair amount. The reason for this is that bullets move incredibly fast, and if you want to see the details of what they're doing in such short spaces as this, you need to slow down time. Anyway, let's take a shot with a Mark 20 5.56mm in super slow motion. You can see that it punches through 4 walls and is stopped by the 5th. You can also see that the trajectory is being altered with each wall, even just a little bit. To more clearly show this, let's punch a bunch of rounds through. So there we go. The disruption of penetrating through wood causes a spread to develop. We aren't seeing anything too out of the ordinary yet. Let's move up. Now we have the MX rifle in 6.5mm. You can see that it goes one compartment further, punching through the 5th wall and stopping on the 6th. Again, we see the deviation from firing many shots into the same area. Now this is where you're going to start seeing something dramatic. Let's take a look at the Mark 18 with its heavy 7.62mm NATO round. The bullet does not play around. It retains 90% of the muzzle velocity 2 walls in, 50% of it for an additional 3 walls, then 2 walls of more than 25%, and it exits at less than 25, after punching through 9 consecutive walls. Looking downrange, we can see the bullets ricocheting off the ground. The difference between the 4 and 5 wall penetration of the 5.56 and 6.5 and the 7.62, as you can see, is massive. Of course it gets better, right? The GM6 with a 12.7mm round, the 50 caliber, punches through the full 9 walls and exits with more than 25% muzzle velocity remaining. The first 4 compartments are red, the next 4 yellow, and it's lethal for anyone unfortunate enough to be in the way. Now let's look at these again, one after each other. Here's the 5.56. Here's the 6.5. This is 7.62. And finally, 12.7. So that's basic penetration. We're standing right by the target and we're shooting against a fairly light material. We've seen how the size and speed of these bullets is factored into things, but what about angles? We'll try 3 angles against these wooden walls. One that's roughly 45 degrees, one that's around 60 or 70 degrees, and one that's at a very shallow angle. For the first one, we'll start with a 5.56. At this angle, while there might be more deflection on the exit side, there are no ricochets on the near side. Knowing this, we can reasonably assume that the larger rifle calibers will be even less impacted by the angle. However, we have the submachine gun. Let's see how it does. As you can see, the lower velocity of the submachine gun combined with the larger bullets makes for a great many ricochets. Let's make the angle a bit more shallow and see if we can get some distinction between the different rifles. It looks like we're getting good ricochets from the 5.56 at this angle. Let's try the MX. It's able to punch through without being affected as the 5.56. Let's see about the 7.62. Well, no surprise there, it's punching through as well. Let's cut the angle even more. The 5.56 is now ricocheting heavily, as is the 6.5. And even the 7.62 is ricocheting more often than not. Only the 50 cal is still reliably punching through at this angle. What we can take away from this is that when faced against light wooden structures, angle of impact isn't that big of a concern for rifles until it gets fairly severe. For pistols and submachine guns, it becomes a factor much sooner. You can reasonably expect the results of this to become harsher the denser the structure is, but we'll get to some examples of that later on. Now let's look at something more formidable than these light wooden walls. Here we have a warehouse with metal walls. They're thin, yes, but they're metal. We'll start with the submachine gun. As you can see, it barely makes it through the wall. The presence of these concrete supports blocks some bullets, while the ones that hit only the metal walls make it through with no real capacity to inflict damage. 5.56 doesn't fare much better. .6.5 makes it in, but with low energy. Once again, we see the power of the 7.62 as it punches through with plenty of damage dealing ability, with some rounds even exiting the far side. The 50 cal, as expected, blows right through the structure without issue. So that's penetration against light metal walls. What about deflection and ricochets? There's actually a cool way to illustrate this. We'll start with a submachine gun and stand real close. Firing a fan like this, the angle of impact differs dramatically across the burst. On the edges, we see a lot of outright ricocheting. But what about inside? Did anything get through? As you can see, it's only a handful. Now what about with the 6.5? There aren't many ricochets on the outside, but at the same time, only the inner portion of the fan made it through, and lost quite a bit of velocity in the process. 7.62 takes us further. There's no real exterior ricochets and plenty of lethal punch for the majority of the rounds which made it in. So now we've covered basic penetration as well as deflection. Let's look at what happens as bullet velocity changes. We'll use the same warehouse and step away from it. Not very far, but far enough to matter. At this distance, about 150 meters, 5.56 no longer penetrates. 6.5 does, but without lethal velocity. While 7.62 is still making it in deadly form. The further away we get, the harder it is for any given bullet to punch through an obstacle. While you may be able to hit an infantryman with deadly effect at long range, structures require more oomph. Moving on, let's look at trees. Don't expect to punch through trees in general, they're quite dense. A 50 cal will go through many, and then other rifles can cut through if they hit on the edges, but generally not the center. 7.62 will go through small trees with fair reliability, but anything lower caliber probably won't. Now, how about fortifications? There's some interesting things you can find with them. For instance, these HESCO barriers are impenetrable to infantry weapons, even the 50 cal. However, if you happen to spot someone firing from the edge of one, and you have a 7.62 rifle or bigger, you might be able to penetrate the corner to hit them. Now, these single sandbag walls, they'll stop 5.56 and 6.5 even at close range, but 7.62 and up will punch through them. The little bunkers made out of them aren't the invulnerable fortresses of ArmA 2. Instead, they'll offer little protection if the enemy brings heavy enough weapons close enough to blow through them. So how about the heavier fortifications, the armored guard towers and such? These are fairly resilient. You have to get right up on them with a 50 cal to actually punch into them. Now, what about your average house? There are a variety of styles of building materials used throughout Altus. You'll find stone, brick, concrete, and other kinds of masonry. Generally speaking, these are tougher than wood and less powerful than metal. There are some tin-walled sheds, but you'll only rarely find a structure with wooden walls. Most walls are going to behave in the following manner. 5.56 won't penetrate, 6.5 will, but only at close range and without much power. 7.62 will at close range and moderate ranges. Anything above that will do well. Also, note that many of the ceilings of these structures are about as hardy as the exterior walls. 6.5 and below simply won't go through them, but 7.62 can be a rude surprise if you can guess where the enemy on another floor might be. Let's close on a bit of nightmare fuel. Throughout this, you've been hearing me talk about how the 7.62 rounds perform well. Well, how about 4,000 of those a minute? Here's what a building looks like after being hit with a minigun strike from a little bird. Pretty, isn't it? You've also heard plenty about how 50 cal rounds do such a good job, yet there were things they couldn't handle. How about the 30 or 40 millimeter armor-piercing rounds from APCs and IFVs? No problem there. Those armored guard towers don't pose much resistance, nor does anything else for that matter. Just always keep in mind that as nice as your infantry weapons may feel at times, any vehicle is likely to be toting something with a much nastier butt. Treat them accordingly. So that basically wraps it up. Without going into the minutiae of how it works on every single building and from every distance and stuff, you have an understanding of the core concepts of how bullet penetration in ArmA works. It's the bullet type, the speed it's going at, the range to the target, and the angle of impact. Submachine guns don't do much, 5.56 doesn't do much more, 6.5 is okay, but 7.62 and up is where the real penetration happens. Hope you found this interesting, and as always, good luck employing it. This is Dyslexy, and until next time, take care.